The alarm on my nightstand buzzed at 6 a.m., just like it did every weekday morning, dragging me out of another restless sleep. I slapped the snooze button once, then forced myself upright before I could sink back into the warmth of the blankets. The tiny one-bedroom apartment I called home was still half dark, blinds drawn against the soft gray light of an early Chicago morning. I shuffled to the kitchenette, bare feet cold against the linoleum, and started the coffee maker. That first cup was less about enjoyment and more about survival. As the machine sputtered to life, I glanced around my apartment. The scuffed furniture from thrift stores, the second-hand sofa with a throw blanket hiding a rip in the upholstery, the stack of unopened mail on the counter that I was too tired to deal with last night. Bills, most likely. It was always bills. I carried my mug of coffee to the small table pressed against the wall and opened my laptop. Work emails had already begun trickling in. Accountants don't really get to sleep in peace. I worked for a mid-sized marketing agency in the city, where urgent was the default setting and 60-hour weeks weren't unusual. Numbers had been my safe place since childhood. Clear, predictable, honest. But the corporate world managed to turn even numbers into something exhausting. The worst part wasn't even the workload. It was watching people like Derek, my colleague who left early most days, somehow receive more recognition than me. Or Arnold, my boss, who had made a habit of taking my ideas and presenting them to clients as if they were his. I smiled politely in meetings, nodded along, and then went back to my cubicle to finish the work no one else wanted to do. I earned enough to keep the lights on, to make rent, to buy groceries if I was careful. Enough to survive. Never enough to feel secure. The moment a car repair or unexpected medical bill hit, the delicate balance of my budget collapsed. My Corolla was 10 years old, its muffler rattling every time it rained, and replacing it wasn't even on the horizon. Sometimes I wondered how my life had ended up here. 34 years old, single, living in a neighborhood just affordable enough to be safe but not exciting, spending weekends clipping coupons and searching for the best grocery deals. Chicago had plenty of glittering high-rises and lively bars, but for me, the city might as well have been a backdrop viewed through the window of the L train, rushing past on my way to work and back. Family wasn't much of a refuge either. My parents had divorced when I was 14, and within 2 years, both had remarried. My father, Robert, was a retired physics teacher. He was the type of man who measured life in lectures. Every mistake was an opportunity to remind you what you should have done differently. He married Elaine, a real estate agent who adored expensive handbags and designer shoes. Her lifestyle was champagne on a beer budget, which meant she had perfected the art of persuading Dad to pay for things he couldn't afford. My mother, Margaret, had married Howard, a wealthy businessman who pinched pennies so tightly they practically screamed. He had money, but it was money with chains attached. Never generous, always calculating. Mom, once warm and affectionate, had slowly adapted to his rigid rules about spending. Somewhere along the way, her definition of love had become security provided by Howard, and I no longer recognized the woman who used to stay up all night sewing Halloween costumes for us kids. Then there were my siblings. Ethan, my older brother at 36, had a charm that fooled strangers, but not me. He drifted from job to job, from girlfriend to girlfriend, leaving behind unpaid bills and emotional wreckage. Borrowing money had become his specialty. Each request came with tears and promises, and each promise dissolved into silence. I had emptied my savings once to help him into rehab, only to discover later he never went. Rachel, my younger sister at 30, was the golden child. An Ivy League degree, a surgeon husband named Daniel, 2 children who looked like they'd stepped out of a magazine, and a suburban house with granite countertops and a backyard playset. She never said it outright, but I could see it in her raised eyebrows and pitying smiles. She thought I was the underachiever of the family, the one who never quite figured things out. Among extended family there was Aunt Grace and Aunt Victoria, sisters as different as night and day. Grace was a public school teacher who never had much, but always shared what she did have. Her apartment was tiny, filled with stacks of well-loved books and a jungle of potted plants. She drove a car so old it wheezed like an asthmatic, but she never complained. She was the only one who remembered to call me on my birthday every year. Victoria, on the other hand, had married wealthy and reminded everyone of it every holiday. Her son, Lucas, inherited her entitlement but not her stability. He burned through money at casinos, always one step away from disaster, but no one in the family dared bring it up. Family gatherings were often a mix of Victoria's backhanded compliments about my modest apartment and Dad's lectures about financial responsibility, with Rachel's perfect life held up as the shining example. The truth was, I was tired. Tired of working so hard for so little. Tired of being the one who bailed out everyone else. Tired of being the invisible one, the one who showed up for others but had no one to lean on when I needed it. The only person who really knew me, who saw past the mask I wore for family and coworkers, was Sophie, my best friend since college. Sophie worked as a nurse, had her own battles with long shifts and difficult patients, but never judged me for my complicated family ties. We had a standing tradition of cheap wine nights once a week, where we'd sit on my tiny balcony and talk until the city lights blurred. My one indulgence, the single reckless habit I allowed myself, was buying lottery tickets every Friday. $10, sometimes $20 if I was feeling bold. My family mocked me for it. Dad lectured about probabilities. Ethan joked, I should just hand the money directly to him. Mom called it a tax on people who couldn't do math. But for me, those tickets represented hope. A fragile hope, maybe even a foolish one, but hope nonetheless. Hope that one day I could breathe without the weight of bills pressing on my chest. Hope that maybe, just maybe, life could be something more. Every so often, I let myself imagine what winning would mean. Traveling to places I'd only seen in magazines. Going back to school for something I was truly passionate about. Having enough savings that a flat tire wouldn't send me into a spiral of panic. I never said these dreams out loud because they felt childish, as if wanting more meant I was ungrateful for what I already had. That morning, as I drained my coffee and packed my lunch into a worn canvas bag, I glanced at the calendar pinned to the fridge. March 16th, my birthday. 34 years old. Another year older, still in the same place, still fighting the same battles. I gave a small, humorless laugh. Happy birthday, Olivia, I muttered to myself. I didn't know that by the time the sun set, everything I thought I knew about my life, about family, about loyalty, about myself, would begin to unravel. I didn't know that the ordinary morning I'd just trudged through would be the last ordinary morning of my life. The wind cut sharply through the streets of Chicago as I walked from the train station toward Patel's Corner Market, clutching my coat tighter around me. It was mid-March, but winter still lingered, stubborn and cold. I had just finished another grueling week at work, 60 hours spent combing through spreadsheets while Arnold, my boss, smiled smugly in meetings and took credit for the strategy that had saved a client hundreds of thousands. I should have felt proud, but instead I left the office with the same dull ache in my chest. Invisible, replaceable, and exhausted. Today, though, was different. It was my birthday. 34 years old. I hadn't told anyone at work, and Sophie had sent me a quick text that morning. Happy birthday, Liv. Wine night soon? But otherwise the day passed like any other. I wasn't in the mood for celebrations. The truth was, I couldn't even remember the last time I'd had a birthday party. Patel's Corner Market sat on the corner of my block, a little bodega with flickering neon signs and shelves crammed too close together. Mr. Patel himself, a kind man in his 60s with salt and pepper hair and deep smile lines, had run the place for decades. He knew all the regulars by name, and he never failed to ask about my week, even when I was too tired to give more than a polite answer. As I pushed open the door, the bell above it chimed. The warm scent of spices and old wood instantly wrapped around me, comforting in its familiarity. Ah, Olivia, happy birthday, Beta, Mr. Patel called from behind the counter, his accent soft but distinct. I blinked. You remembered? He chuckled, adjusting his glasses. Of course. You come here every Friday evening. It is tradition. And you always buy your tickets. I smiled, embarrassed but oddly touched. Well, you know me, same routine. I reached into my wallet. Actually, maybe tonight I'll splurge. $20 instead of 10. A little birthday luck. He nodded knowingly. A good idea. Sometimes the universe surprises us when we least expect it. He handed me a fresh set of tickets, the corners crisp. Normally, I let the computer pick the numbers. Quick, impersonal. But tonight, I hesitated. Maybe I'll choose my own, I said slowly. tapping the screen of the machine. My fingers hovered over the keypad as I thought. I picked numbers tied to the people who had shaped me, for better or worse. March 16th for my own birthday, 12 for my mother, 21 for my father, 9 for Aunt Grace, 30 for Sophie. 6 numbers that carried pieces of my life, both pain and comfort, woven together. Mr. Patel slipped the printed ticket into a small envelope and slid it across the counter with a wink. May this birthday be your lucky one. I tucked the ticket into my purse and left, the wind biting again as I walked the short distance home. My apartment was quiet when I stepped inside, the silence pressing in. I set down the takeout bag from the Thai restaurant around the corner, pad Thai and spring rolls, my little birthday treat. Sophie had given me a bottle of red wine last week, and I opened it now, pouring a generous glass. I curled up on the couch, balancing the carton on my knees, scrolling mindlessly through social media as I ate. Friends posted pictures from restaurants, parties, weekend getaways. Rachel, my sister, had uploaded a photo of herself at some charity gala, sparkling in a sequined gown. Dozens of comments poured in. You're glowing. Perfect couple. I tossed my phone aside with a sigh. At 8 o'clock, the lottery numbers were announced. I almost forgot about it. After all, I'd been buying tickets for years and never won more than $20. I muted the TV halfway through a reality show rerun and pulled out my ticket lazily. The announcer's voice read off the numbers. 3, 16, 12, 21, 9, 30. My eyes darted between the ticket and the screen. My heart kicked against my ribs. First number matched. Second matched. Third. Yes. Fourth. Oh my God. Fifth. Sixth. All of them. For a moment the world seemed to tilt. I couldn't breathe. I stared down at the slip of paper in my hand, my fingers trembling so badly that I nearly dropped it. No, I whispered, half laughing, half choking. No way. I grabbed the remote, rewound the live broadcast, and watched again. Each number appeared on the screen exactly as on my ticket. The same sequence, the same impossible alignment. I had just won $47 million. I pressed my hand to my mouth, a sound escaping that was part sob, part gasp. My body shook with adrenaline. I checked the ticket against the lottery website, against the TV again, against the newspaper's online feed. Every source said the same thing. I was the sole winner. The wine glass toppled over on the table, crimson spilling across an unpaid electricity bill, but I barely noticed. My entire world had cracked open in an instant. Just that morning, I had been worrying about whether I could afford new tires. Now I could buy the entire shop that sold them. I stumbled to the window, staring out at the city lights stretching into the distance. Chicago buzzed outside, oblivious to the fact that in one small apartment, one ordinary woman's life had just changed forever. Excitement surged through me, electric and dizzying. Then fear followed swiftly behind. I had read the stories. Lottery winners who lost everything, who were hounded by greedy relatives and strangers, who ended up bankrupt or worse. Families destroyed, friendships ruined, lives unraveling under the weight of sudden fortune. My phone buzzed with a birthday notification from my bank app. Your balance is low. I let out a breathless laugh, almost hysterical. If only the app knew. That night, I didn't sleep. I paced my apartment, alternately grinning at the ticket and then shoving it deep into my purse as though hiding it would make the reality less terrifying. I thought of my father, who would lecture me about responsible investing. My mother, who would tell Howard before she even finished congratulating me. Ethan, already rehearsing the story he'd spin to convince me to loan him a chunk. Rachel, with her perfect house and kids, insisting her life was harder than it looked. Would they celebrate with me, or would they see me as a walking ATM? I didn't know the answer, but as dawn crept through the blinds, I knew one thing with certainty. I couldn't tell anyone. Not yet. Not until I figured out what this meant. I set the ticket carefully into an envelope, sealed it, and placed it inside a folder of tax documents. Ironically, the one place I knew no one would ever look. Then I sat on the couch, staring at the lightening sky, and whispered into the quiet, "Happy birthday, Olivia." This time the words didn't sound bitter. They sounded like a promise. I didn't sleep that night. The ticket sat on my coffee table like a loaded weapon, wrapped in an envelope I had sealed and resealed 3 times, as if paper glue could contain the tidal wave it represented. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those numbers flashing across the television screen again, felt the rush of disbelief crashing against the rocks of reality. At 2 in the morning, I gave up on pretending to rest and opened my laptop. If there was ever a time for answers, it was now. I typed into the search bar, "What happens after you win the lottery?" The results came fast and overwhelming. The first article was celebratory. 10 people who turned lottery wins into lifelong fortunes. Smiling faces stood beside oversized checks, their lives transformed. But the deeper I clicked, the darker the stories became. From riches to ruin, the curse of the jackpot. Families torn apart by sudden wealth. The $100 million divorce. I read about a man in Florida who won $20 million and ended up bankrupt within 5 years. A woman in California whose siblings sued her for a share. A family in New Jersey who had to move states after strangers harassed them for money. One headline froze me in place. Lottery winner murdered by friend. I scrolled until my eyes burned, until the faces of ruined winners blurred together. The pattern was terrifying in its simplicity. Sudden wealth magnified everything. Greed, jealousy, selfishness. Relationships didn't blossom under the light of fortune. They withered, corrupted, or exploded. By 3 a.m., I found myself on an obscure financial blog, reading words that hit harder than any headline. The lottery is not a path to freedom. It is the quickest way to discover the fragility of your relationships. Money reveals everything you didn't want to know about the people you love. I leaned back in my chair, staring at those words as though they had been written for me personally. My family flashed through my mind. Ethan's endless borrowing, Rachel's perfect facade, Dad's lectures, Mom's blind loyalty to Howard, Victoria's cruel gossip. Would they rejoice for me? Or would they sharpen their knives the moment they smelled blood? A knot tightened in my stomach. I remembered every time I had emptied my savings for someone else. Ethan's rehab, Rachel's wedding, Dad's leaking roof. Every promise to repay, every vow of gratitude that dissolved into silence. What would $47 million do to them if a few thousand had already revealed so much? By 4 a.m., I was pacing, whispering to myself in the half-light of my apartment. I can't tell them. Not yet. Not like this. My reflection in the window looked pale, eyes wide, hair a tangled halo of stress. For the first time in years, I was holding something no one else could touch, and if I wasn't careful, they would all try. I switched gears, searching for how to claim lottery winnings anonymously. That rabbit hole was marginally less horrifying. I learned that Illinois allowed winners to remain anonymous through legal trusts. There were articles from lawyers advising winners to lawyer up immediately, to create a financial firewall before doing anything else. One name kept popping up in local forums. Thomas Bennett, attorney at law, specializing in estate planning and high net worth cases. There were testimonials about how he had guided lottery winners, celebrities, even professional athletes through the maze of sudden wealth. By 5 a.m., I had his office number scribbled on a sticky note. The website showed a glossy photo of him. Mid-50s, silver hair, sharp suit. The kind of man who looked like he had seen everything and still kept his client's secret safe. The coffee pot was empty by then, my body jittery with caffeine and adrenaline. Dawn was breaking, a thin orange glow seeping between the blinds, and I realized I had been awake for nearly 24 hours. My phone buzzed with a reminder for work. Normally, I never called in sick. I prided myself on being reliable, the one who showed up no matter how exhausted. But today, the thought of walking into that gray office and pretending to be the same underpaid accountant was impossible. With a shaky breath, I dialed the office number and left a voicemail. "Hi, this is Olivia Carter. I won't be in today. I'm not feeling well." My voice cracked slightly, but it wasn't entirely a lie. I was sick in a way, sick with possibility, sick with fear. Then I dialed Thomas Bennett's office. The receptionist answered crisply. "Bennett and Associates. How can I help you?" I swallowed, my throat dry. "Hi, my name is Olivia Carter. I need to schedule an appointment with Mr. Bennett as soon as possible. It's urgent." Financial planning. There was a pause, the faint clicking of keys. We can fit you in this afternoon at 2 p.m. Does that work? Yes, I blurted out. Yes, thank you. After hanging up, I collapsed onto the couch, the sticky note with his name still clutched in my hand. For the first time since the numbers had aligned, I felt a sliver of calm. I had a plan, a direction, but even as relief washed through me, the fear remained, gnawing at the edges of my thoughts. I pictured walking into Bennett's sleek office in my thrift store coat, clutching a purse that cost less than his tie. I imagined telling him that I was now worth more money than I could comprehend. Would he see me as a client, or as a fool waiting to be taken advantage of? I closed my eyes, trying to steady myself. Sophie's words from countless balcony nights drifted back. Liv, you're tougher than you think. You just don't know it yet. Maybe she was right. Maybe this was the moment I would finally find out. At 7 a.m., the city outside was waking up. Cars honked, dogs barked, trains rumbled across the elevated tracks. I pulled on my coat, ticket sealed in the envelope once more, tucked into my purse like a heartbeat. Today, I would meet with Thomas Bennett. Today, I would take the first step toward protecting my future. And maybe, just maybe, toward protecting myself from the people I called family. Thomas Bennett's office was everything I imagined mine wasn't. Gleaming marble floors, framed diplomas in thick mahogany frames, and an assistant who looked like she'd stepped out of a glossy magazine. I sat in the waiting area, knees pressed together, purse clutched against my chest, while businessmen in tailored suits glided past, as if they were born knowing how to belong in places like this. When Thomas finally appeared, he wasn't intimidating the way I had feared. Mid-50s, distinguished salt-and-pepper hair, wire-rimmed glasses that softened his sharp suit. His voice was calm, measured, as though nothing in the world could startle him. "Miss Carter," he said, extending a hand. "Come in. Let's talk." I followed him into an office that overlooked the Chicago skyline. My purse felt heavier than bricks, the envelope inside practically burning a hole in it. When he gestured for me to sit, I placed the ticket on his desk with trembling hands. For a heartbeat, his eyes widened. Then he schooled his expression back into professionalism. He examined the numbers, cross-checked them against his computer, and then looked back at me. "Well," he said with a small smile, "congratulations. You're a very wealthy woman." The word sent a shiver down my spine. Wealthy. Me. Olivia Carter, the accountant who agonized over grocery coupons, who had once cried over a $600 car repair. The next 2 hours were a blur of legal jargon and structured plans. Thomas explained the concept of a blind trust, a legal entity that could claim the winnings on my behalf while keeping my identity hidden. He outlined tax implications, investment strategies, the importance of assembling a team, an accountant, a financial advisor, even a security consultant. "The biggest mistake lottery winners make," he said, folding his hands, "is telling too many people, too soon. Once the secret is out, you can never put it back." I nodded, feeling both terrified and relieved. My instincts had been right. Silence was my shield. Over the following weeks, everything moved quickly. The trust, Carter Holdings, was established. The claim was filed, the funds wired. I remember the exact moment Thomas slid a folder across the table, showing me the balance of accounts now under my control. 28,000, after taxes, after legal fees, after everything. That was the number. The screen glowed, digits stretching farther than my imagination could follow. For a dizzy second, I couldn't breathe. I was rich, truly, impossibly rich. And yet, when I left Bennett's office and walked into the sharp wind of downtown Chicago, nothing around me had changed. My shoes still pinched, my coat still bore a tear in the lining. My Corolla was still parked 2 blocks away with rust creeping along the wheel well. I had more money than I could ever spend in 10 lifetimes. And still, I was the same woman who had worried about her balance being low just last week. That night, I sat on my sagging sofa and stared at the folder of documents. The bank accounts, the trust papers, the investment summaries, all proof that my life was no longer ordinary. I poured myself a glass of wine and whispered into the quiet, "You're a millionaire, Olivia." The words felt surreal, like lines in someone else's script, but reality settled back quickly. Bills still came in the mail. The office still demanded my presence at 8 a.m. sharp. Arnold still stole my ideas. Derek still slipped out early. No one looked at me differently because no one knew. I was living two lives. The struggling accountant by day, the secret millionaire by night. At first, the secrecy was thrilling. Walking past my coworkers as they complained about rent hikes, knowing I could buy the entire apartment building if I wanted to. Listening to Sophie worry about medical bills, biting my tongue not to shout. I could pay for your whole hospital wing. Even clipping coupons at the grocery store became absurdly funny, because technically, I could have bought every single item in the store 10 times over. But the weight of silence grew heavier each day. I couldn't tell Sophie. Not yet. She was my closest friend. But even she had warned me once that sudden money ruined people. I couldn't tell my family. They had already proven they saw me as a resource, not a person. And so I carried the secret alone, a wall between me and the rest of the world. It seeped into everything. At work, when Arnold belittled me in front of clients, I fantasized about walking out mid-meeting, dropping my resignation letter on the table. Instead, I smiled and scribbled notes. At home, when my landlord emailed about raising rent again, I imagined buying the entire building just to evict him. Instead, I quietly paid, just like before. The dissonance gnawed at me. Outwardly, nothing had changed. Inwardly, everything had. The old Corolla rattled down the street as if mocking me, and I found myself gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles went white. I could have bought a Tesla, a Porsche, anything I wanted, but a brand new car parked outside my apartment would raise eyebrows. People would ask questions, so I drove the rattletrap and kept my secret. At night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, imagining what it would be like to live honestly, to tell people, to share the joy, to stop pretending. But the stories I had read during that sleepless night returned like ghosts. Families torn apart. Trust shattered. Lives ruined. No, for now, secrecy was survival. One evening, Sophie came over with a bottle of cheap white wine, and we sat on the balcony wrapped in blankets against the spring chill. The city lights shimmered below, and she turned to me with her familiar nurse's gaze, sharp and concerned. "You've been different lately," she said. "Distracted. Like you're carrying something heavy. You can tell me, you know." I smiled, forcing a casual laugh. "Work's been hell. Same old story." She frowned, not entirely convinced, but let it go. We clinked glasses and watched the trains rattle past. I wanted to tell her. God, I wanted to tell her. But instead I swallowed the secret with the wine, tasting bitterness where sweetness should have been. That night, lying in bed, I realized something chilling. I had gained more money than I could ever spend, but in the process, I had lost something else. Freedom. Freedom to be honest. Freedom to be myself. I was Olivia Carter, millionaire, and no one could ever know. By the end of the third week, the secret had begun to eat at me like rust on metal. Each day, I carried the weight of two identities: Olivia, the struggling accountant, coupon clipper, bill juggler, and Olivia, the millionaire, with millions resting quietly in investment accounts under Carter Holdings. On the surface, I hadn't changed. I still took the train to work, still carried my worn-out canvas bag, still drove the Corolla with the sputtering muffler. At lunch, my co-workers traded stories of debt and rent increases, and I nodded along, even offering advice on budgeting, advice I no longer needed but was still bound to by habit. But at night, when the apartment was quiet, the dissonance cracked me open. I'd stare at the trust documents in the folder, pages stamped and notarized, numbers that confirmed my fortune. I'd whisper to myself, "You're free now." And yet, I didn't feel free. I felt trapped, suffocating behind a wall of lies I had built to protect myself. The question that haunted me most was simple. What if they knew? Would Dad congratulate me or scold me for not saving more responsibly? Would Mom beam with pride or immediately hand the information to Howard, who would calculate how much I owed to family obligations? Rachel would smile tightly, then remind me how expensive private school tuition was. Ethan would cry, promise rehab, and vanish with a suitcase of my money. Aunt Victoria would turn me into dinner party gossip. And Aunt Grace, gentle, kind Aunt Grace, she would probably hug me, congratulate me, and then go back to her classroom, never asking for a dime. But I couldn't rely on assumptions. Not anymore. The idea came late one night as I lay awake, staring at the cracks in the ceiling. If money revealed the truth about people, then perhaps the absence of it could too. I had spent years giving, sacrificing, emptying my pockets for others. What would happen if the tables were turned? If I needed them? I sat up in bed, pulse quickening. A test. An experiment. I'd pretend I was in trouble. Serious, but believable trouble. Something that required help, but not impossible to fix. I'd ask each of them for the same amount. $5,000. Enough to sting, enough to show commitment, but not enough to bankrupt anyone. Then I would see who stepped forward. Who cared? Who turned away? The thought terrified me, but it also steadied me. For the first time since the numbers matched, I had a sense of control. The next day, I scribbled notes into my journal during my lunch break. A believable story was crucial. Losing my job was the cleanest angle. Everyone knew the economy was rocky. Layoffs weren't uncommon. I worked for a mid-sized marketing firm. If it suddenly folded after losing a major client, no one would question it. I practiced the narrative in my head. The company collapsed overnight. I hadn't received my final paycheck because the CEO was under investigation for embezzlement. I'd applied for unemployment, but that would take weeks. My emergency savings were gone, spent on recent medical tests for some vague but worrying symptoms. I needed a loan to cover rent and expenses until I landed something new. It was tight enough to be frightening, but realistic enough to be believed. That evening, Sophie came over with takeout, and we sat on my balcony. The city hummed around us, neon flickering, trains clattering down the tracks. I hesitated, then finally said, "There's something I've been thinking about." Sophie raised an eyebrow, chopsticks pausing mid-air. "You've had that look on your face for days. Out with it." I drew a deep breath. "I'm going to run an experiment. With my family." Her frown was immediate. "What kind of experiment?" "I'm going to tell them I lost my job, that I need help, and I'll see who actually comes through." Sophie set down her food slowly. "Olivia, that sounds manipulative. Dangerous even. Why would you do that?" "Because I need to know," I said, my voice sharper than intended. "I've spent my whole life bailing them out. Every time Ethan called crying, every time Rachel needed a loan, every time Dad asked me to cover something, I gave. And when I needed something," my throat tightened. "They were never there. Never." Sophie's gaze softened, but concern remained etched in her eyes. "So you're going to lie to them? Trick them into proving their love?" I flinched. "It's not about tricking. It's about truth. If they can't help me when I need it, when I supposedly have nothing, then why would they deserve to share in my life now that I have everything?" Silence stretched between us, broken only by the rumble of a passing train. Finally, Sophie sighed. "I get it. I do. But I'm warning you, this could backfire. You could end up hurting yourself more than them." "Maybe," I admitted, "but I'd rather know the truth than live in doubt." She studied me for a long moment, then nodded reluctantly. "Fine. But if you're going to do this, at least do it right. You need details. Specifics. People will ask questions." So together, we rehearsed. She grilled me like a skeptical relative. "Why didn't you save more? How are you applying for jobs? What exactly happened to your company?" I crafted answers, memorized them, built a story sturdy enough to hold up under scrutiny. By midnight, I had a list. Call Mom and Howard first, gauge their reaction, meet Dad for coffee, present the story face to face, visit Rachel in her perfect suburban home, text Ethan since he never answers calls, reach out to Elaine, Howard, Victoria, Lucas, save Aunt Grace for last. Partly because I trusted her, partly because I didn't want to face disappointment if she failed me too. I closed my journal, heart pounding. $5,000. That was the price of loyalty, the currency of truth. As Sophie left that night, she hugged me tight. "Be careful, Liv. Don't lose yourself in this." Her words lingered long after she was gone, but my mind was already set. The next morning, I stared at my phone, thumb hovering over my mother's contact. My hands shook, not from fear of lying, but from fear of the answer. With a deep breath, I pressed call. It was time to see who my real family was. My thumb hovered over the screen for a long time before I finally pressed call. The ringing tone echoed in my ear, steady and sharp, like a countdown to something I wasn't sure I was ready to hear. On the third ring, my mother answered. "Olivia?" Her voice sounded distracted, hurried. I could picture her in the kitchen of the suburban house she shared with Howard, earbuds in, shuffling around with a glass of white wine in her hand. "Hi, sweetheart. Everything okay? You sound tense." I swallowed, forcing my voice to shake just enough. "No, Mom. Everything's not okay." There was a pause, then the sound of footsteps. A door closed in the background. She must have moved away from Howard. What happened? I launched into the story I'd rehearsed. The company collapsing after losing its biggest client. Whispers of embezzlement at the top. The sudden shutdown. How I hadn't received my final paycheck. How unemployment benefits would take weeks. How the medical tests I'd needed recently had drained the little savings I had left. As I spoke, I layered in pauses, small cracks in my voice, letting her fill the silence with her own imagination. "Oh my God, Olivia." Her voice softened, almost maternal, almost the way it used to be when I was little. "That's terrible. I can't believe they'd just close like that. Did you see this coming?" "No," I whispered. "It was so sudden." There was silence for a moment, just her breathing on the line. Then she asked, "What are you going to do now? Have you started applying anywhere else?" "Yes," I said quickly. "I've sent out applications, but nothing yet. The job market's tight. I've got some interviews lined up, but..." I let my voice falter. "Rent's due next week. I don't know how I'm going to cover it." Her sigh was heavy, the kind that made guilt bloom in my chest. I hated myself for a moment, hated the manipulation, even though it was the truth I was after. "I hate to ask this, Mom," I continued softly, "but I need help. About $5,000, just to get through this month. I promise I'll pay you back when I get back on my feet." Silence. It stretched on so long I thought the call had dropped. Then finally her voice returned, a little thinner now. "Oh, Olivia. You know I'd love to help. But things are complicated right now. Howard and I just put a down payment on the lake house, and we're pretty cash poor at the moment." Lake house. The words landed like stones in my stomach. I pictured her showing off glossy photos of that house to Victoria at Thanksgiving, smiling with pride while I ate reheated leftovers in my apartment. "Could you maybe ask your father?" she added quickly. "Or Rachel? Paul makes good money at the hospital." I bit down hard on the inside of my cheek. I was hoping to avoid Dad, and Rachel has the kids and tuition. "Yes, of course," Mom rushed in, as if relieved. "I'll talk to Howard, see what we can do, but I can't promise anything, sweetheart. You know how tight he is with money, especially when it comes to, well, you know." Yes, I knew. Howard had never hidden the fact that, in his mind, I was not his responsibility. His money was for Mom, for their shared projects, for their future. Not for me. "I understand," I said quietly. My voice sounded small, even to me. "I'm so sorry, Liv. Truly. But you'll get through this. You're strong. You always have been. Maybe this is even a sign. You've been stuck in that firm too long. Maybe this is the push you need to find something more stable." Stable. That word again. The same word she'd used when I decided against taking a banking job after college. The same word she used whenever she couldn't understand my choices. "Yeah," I murmured. "Maybe." We said our goodbyes. Her voice was warm, but the warmth of someone who had already decided she couldn't step in. When the line went dead, I stared at the phone in my hand, my pulse still thundering. I pulled my journal from the table, flipped to the fresh page labeled Mother Miark's Margaret, and began to write. Expressed concern, listened carefully, brought up Howard quickly, said she'd see what we can do but no promise, mentioned new lake house, shifted responsibility toward Dad and Rachel. I underlined the last point twice. My hand trembled as I set the pen down. Part of me had known this was how it would go. But another part, the small, childlike part, had hoped my mother would surprise me. That she'd put me first. Just once. That she'd remember the girl who used to crawl into her lap when nightmares came. Instead, she had passed the weight along, the same way she always had. I leaned back on the couch, staring at the ceiling. The apartment felt colder somehow, though the radiator was still rattling away in the corner. One test down. One disappointment confirmed. I wasn't sure I had the strength to keep going, but I knew I would. Because if this was the truth, I needed all of it. Tomorrow would be Dad. And somehow, I already knew his response would sting even worse. The next morning I dressed with unusual care, as though the right sweater and scarf could shield me from what was coming. My father preferred conversations face to face, so I had suggested meeting at a cafe near his house on the north side. He liked that place. Quiet, reliable, with free refills of black coffee and a corner table where he could spread out papers if he wanted. When I arrived, he was already there, seated with a newspaper folded neatly at his elbow. His posture was straight, his hair more silver than I remembered, and his glasses perched low on his nose. He looked up as I approached, his eyes scanning me like a teacher inspecting a tardy student. "You look tired," he said by way of greeting, his tone neither affectionate nor critical, just matter-of-fact. I managed a thin smile as I slid into the chair across from him. "It's been a rough couple of weeks," he nodded, signaling for the waitress to bring another cup of coffee. Then he folded his hands on the table, giving me his full attention. "Tell me what's going on." I launched into the story, careful to repeat it with the same details I had told Mom. Sudden company collapse, embezzlement scandal, no final paycheck, unemployment delayed. I added just enough personal strain to make it believable. Bills piling up, rent due, the stress of constant job applications. He listened in silence, his face impassive except for the occasional tightening of his jaw. When I finished, I let the words hang between us for a moment before finally saying, "Dad, I hate to ask this, but I need some help. About $5,000, just to get through the next month or two. I'll pay you back as soon as I can." He leaned back in his chair, crossed his arms, and sighed deeply. "Olivia." His voice shifted, slipping into the familiar cadence I remembered from high school when I'd brought home a disappointing grade. "I've always told you, always, that you need 6 months of expenses saved. An emergency fund? That's financial planning 101. What happened to that?" "Life happened," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Medical bills, car repairs, rent. I just couldn't keep up." He shook his head slowly. "You should have adjusted your lifestyle. That apartment of yours, too expensive. Those streaming services you insist on keeping, luxuries you don't need. If you'd listened to me years ago, you wouldn't be in this situation now." I clenched my hands in my lap, nails digging into my palms. "Dad, I'm not asking for a lecture. I just need some help." "And you think asking for money is going to solve your problems?" he countered. His eyes narrowed, sharp behind the lenses of his glasses. "No, Olivia. Throwing money at a problem only creates dependency. What you need is discipline." I felt heat rise in my chest, a mix of shame and anger. I've been disciplined. I've been working 60-hour weeks, clipping coupons, driving a car that barely runs. I've done everything right, and I still ended up here. He leaned forward, lowering his voice as though confiding something profound. "And now you expect others to bail you out. That's not how the real world works. You made choices, and now you're facing the consequences. Maybe this is the lesson you needed." The waitress arrived with my coffee, but I barely noticed. My father's words were slicing through me too sharply. "Dad," I whispered, "I'm not asking for charity. Just a loan. I'll pay you back." He placed a hand on mine, the gesture almost paternal, but his tone was condescending. "I would love to help you, Olivia, but Elaine and I are focused on our retirement. We can't afford to dip into those funds. It would be irresponsible." Irresponsible. That was his favorite word, his shield against anything resembling compassion. He patted my hand lightly, as if closing the subject. "This will be a good learning experience for you. Sometimes we need to hit rock bottom before we make the changes we've been avoiding." My throat tightened. I blinked hard, fighting the sting in my eyes. I wanted to shout, to tell him how often I had sacrificed for this family, how many times I had pulled Ethan out of disaster, how I had helped Mom when she needed it, how I had silently shouldered burdens no one else saw. But the words stuck, trapped behind the lump in my throat. Instead, I nodded mutely, pulling my hand back. "I understand." He looked satisfied, as though he had imparted wisdom rather than slammed a door. He picked up his coffee, sipping it as if the conversation were over. I stared into my own cup, the steam blurring my vision. The bitterness of the coffee matched the bitterness pooling in my chest. After a few minutes of silence, I forced a polite smile. "Thanks for meeting me, Dad. I appreciate your advice." He nodded approvingly, clearly pleased that I'd fallen back into the role of dutiful daughter. Anytime, Olivia. Remember, tough times build character. We parted outside, the spring air still sharp. He hugged me briefly, his embrace stiff and perfunctory. You'll be fine, he said with finality, before walking away toward his car. I stood there for a long moment, watching him go, feeling both hollow and heavy. Then I pulled out my journal and scribbled on the page titled Father Robert. Listened without interrupting. Turned conversation into financial lecture. Criticized lifestyle choices. Declined to help, citing retirement savings. Called situation a learning experience. I underlined that last phrase until the pen nearly tore the page. As I tucked the notebook back into my purse, a wave of exhaustion swept over me. 2 calls. 2 disappointments. The experiment was working exactly as I feared it would, and yet I couldn't stop. Next on the list was Rachel. My perfect sister, with the perfect life. And though I already suspected her answer, I wasn't prepared for how much it would hurt to hear it. Saturday afternoon, I drove north toward the suburbs where Rachel lived. Her neighborhood was the kind you saw in glossy real estate brochures. Wide streets lined with manicured lawns, identical mailboxes, and 2-story homes with stone facades and double garages. The kind of place where kids rode bikes in cul-de-sacs and parents compared remodels over wine. As I parked my Corolla at the curb, its muffler giving one last cough, I felt like an imposter. My car looked like it had wandered into the wrong zip code. Rachel's house stood tall and polished, with a perfect row of tulips blooming along the walkway. Through the wide front windows, I caught glimpses of stainless steel appliances and gleaming hardwood floors. Rachel greeted me at the door, her hair pulled into a sleek bun, her smile radiant. "Liv, what a surprise!" Her voice carried that polished cheerfulness she had perfected over the years, the kind that made her sound like she was perpetually hosting a charity gala. She ushered me inside, where the scent of vanilla candles and fresh flowers filled the air. Every surface gleamed. Family portraits lined the walls. Rachel in a cocktail dress beside her husband Daniel in his crisp white coat, their 2 children beaming in matching outfits. Come in, come in. The kids are at swimming lessons, and Daniel's golfing, so it's just us." We settled at the granite island in her kitchen. She pressed a button on a machine that whirred and hissed before producing 2 lattes topped with perfect foam. I wrapped my hands around the warm cup, feeling out of place in her curated world. "So," Rachel said, leaning forward, "what brings you all the way out here?" I inhaled slowly, then began my story. The company collapse, the embezzlement scandal, the missing paycheck, the job applications, the looming rent. I painted the picture carefully, letting worry seep into my voice. Her eyes widened as I spoke, her manicured hand reaching across the counter to squeeze mine. "Oh my God, Liv, that's awful. I can't believe they just shut down like that. You poor thing." For a brief foolish moment, hope flickered in me. Maybe she would surprise me. Maybe the sister who had everything would reach across the gulf between us. When I finally said, "I need some help, about 5,000, just to cover rent and bills until I find something new," her expression shifted almost imperceptibly. A flicker of unease crossed her face before the polished smile returned. 5,000, she repeated slowly, withdrawing her hand. "Well, this is actually not a great time. We just bought the new Audi last month, and the kids' tuition was due. Plus, we're redoing the master bathroom." She laughed lightly, as if to soften the words. "You know how it is. Expenses never stop." I forced myself to nod. "I wouldn't ask if I wasn't desperate." I know, she said quickly, almost too quickly. "Let me talk to Daniel. See what we can do. Maybe we can help with a smaller amount, or—" She brightened as if struck with inspiration. "Maybe you could move in with us temporarily. We have the guest room. Well, it's being used for storage right now, but we could clear it out." The image of me crammed into their pristine suburban home, surrounded by reminders of how much I didn't belong, made my stomach twist. "Thanks, but moving wouldn't work. I need to stay near the city for interviews." She nodded sympathetically, her eyes sliding away from mine. "Of course. I'll talk to Daniel tonight. I'll call you, okay?" But the way she avoided my gaze told me everything. There would be no call. Or if there was, it would be filled with excuses and apologies. I finished my latte, thanked her for listening, and let her hug me at the door. As I stepped back onto the perfect driveway, her Audi gleamed in the sunlight. polished and new. My Corolla sputtered to life with a groan. The contrast was almost laughable. That evening, I turned to the other sibling on my list, Ethan. Reaching him had always been a gamble. He floated from couch to couch, job to job, woman to woman, leaving behind trails of unpaid debts and broken promises. He rarely answered calls, but he usually responded to texts, especially if the subject was money. I typed carefully, my thumbs trembling. Hey Ethan. Something bad happened. My company shut down suddenly. No paycheck. I've been applying everywhere, but rent's due next week, and I'm out of savings. I hate to ask this, but I need help. About $5,000 to get through. I'll pay you back as soon as I can. I hit send and waited. Minutes crawled into an hour. Finally, my phone buzzed. His reply was short. That sucks, sis. Really tight right now myself. I'll call you later. Relief flickered. At least he hadn't said no outright. But the call never came. The next day, I sent a follow-up text. No response. I tried calling, but each time it went straight to voicemail. After the third attempt, his inbox was full. My chest ached with a familiar, bitter sting. This was the same brother who had sobbed into the phone 2 years ago, begging me for $3,000 to cover his rent after his girlfriend kicked him out. The same brother who had sworn he'd pay me back within weeks, then vanished into silence until his next crisis. And still, some part of me had hoped that this time would be different. It wasn't. Back at my apartment, I opened my journal and wrote, Rachel, reaction, immediate sympathy, excuses, Audi, tuition, bathroom remodel, deflected responsibility to Daniel, offered guest room instead of money, promised to call later, unlikely, Ethan, reaction, brief text, no follow-up, ignored calls, pattern consistent with past behavior. I set the pen down, staring at the words until they blurred. The results weren't surprising, but they were still painful. My siblings, my blood, had shown me who they were when I asked for help. 3 family members down, 3 disappointments recorded. The experiment was only halfway begun, but already, the weight of the truth was pressing heavily on my chest. Next on my list were the step-parents, and if history was any guide, their answers would cut even deeper. By the time Sunday evening came, I felt like a boxer staggering into the next round already bruised and half defeated. Mom had passed me off to Howard. Dad had turned my pain into a lecture. Rachel had offered sympathy, but no substance, and Ethan had simply disappeared. Part of me wanted to stop, close the notebook, tear up the plan, retreat back into secrecy. But another part knew I had to finish. The next name on my list was E, my father's. I sat, Olivia, hello. Hi, Elaine. Thanks for picking up. I forced a small laugh, then slipped into my story. The same details as before. Company collapse. No paycheck. Rent coming due. I hate to ask, but I was wondering if you might be able to help. About $5,000. Just until I get on my feet again. There was no pause, no sigh, no flicker of concern. Her response was immediate and sharp. Olivia, I'm sorry you're in this situation, but Warren and I are not in a position to help. Perhaps this is an opportunity for you to learn better financial management. Have you considered downsizing your apartment? Or getting a roommate? Living within your means? Her tone was so matter-of-fact it made my throat burn. I've already cut everything to the bone, I said quietly. Well, sometimes reality teaches us lessons we don't want but need, she replied. Warren and I have worked hard for what we have. We can't simply hand out money whenever someone makes poor choices. Poor choices. The words stung. I had made sacrifices, endured sleepless nights, balanced everything on the edge of collapse, and she had the audacity to call them poor choices. I thanked her through gritted teeth and hung up. In my journal, under Elaine, reaction, blunt refusal, criticized lifestyle, suggested downsizing, getting roommate, no concern, no compassion. I underlined no compassion twice. Calling Howard was worse. I almost didn't want to, but I had to hear it. He answered in his deep, deliberate tone. Yes? Hi, Howard, it's Olivia. What is it? No warmth, no patience. I swallowed. I've run into some trouble. My company shut down. No paycheck. I've been applying everywhere. But in the meantime, I need some help with rent. About $5,000. I would pay you back as soon as... He cut me off. Olivia, let me be clear. You are not my daughter. I have supported your mother for years. That is where my responsibility begins and ends. Your financial problems are yours to solve. Perhaps you should have chosen a more lucrative career path. His words hit with surgical precision, leaving no room for hope. I see, I said softly. Thank you for your honesty. Good luck, he added flatly before hanging up. The line went dead. My hand trembled as I set the phone down. Howard had never been cruel so much as cold, but tonight the coldness felt like a wall of ice pressing against my chest. In the journal, Howard, reaction, explicit refusal, stated I was not his daughter, blamed career choice, offered no empathy. I closed my eyes, 2 more to go. Aunt Victoria was next. I almost laughed at the absurdity of even asking her, but the experiment had to be complete. I dialed, bracing myself. Well, Olivia, she said after I explained, her voice smooth with condescension. I always warned your father that marketing was an unstable field. If you had taken that banking job after college like I suggested, you wouldn't be in this mess. I know, Aunt Victoria, I murmured, letting her words roll past me. As for money, darling, we all have our own expenses. Our vacation home in Naples needs renovations, and the market's been terrible for investments lately. I simply can't justify giving handouts. You must learn to stand on your own 2 feet. Then, as if twisting the knife, she added, but chin up. Struggles build character. Maybe this will teach you resilience. By the time I ended the call, my hands were shaking with a mix of fury and despair. In the journal, Victoria, reaction, criticized career path, cited her own expenses, called request a handout, cloaked refusal in smug life lesson. Finally, I reached out to Lucas, her son. He answered on the first ring, his tone dripping with false sympathy. Olivia, God, that's awful. You know I've always got your back. Relief bloomed for half a second. Really? Of course. 5,000, you said? I can swing that. Let's meet for lunch tomorrow. I'll bring a check. Thank you, I whispered, almost believing him. But the next day, an hour before our scheduled meeting, he texted. Something came up. Can we reschedule? Reschedule never came. My calls went unanswered. My texts remained on read. The hope I'd foolishly clung to evaporated. Lucas. Just like his mother. Just like Ethan. Just like the rest. All words. No action. In the journal. Lucas. Reaction. Immediate promise to help. Suggested lunch with check. Cancelled last minute. Ghosted afterward. By the time I put the pen down, my hands ached from gripping it too tightly. 8 tests completed. 8 disappointments recorded. I closed the journal and sat in the silence of my apartment. The radiator clanged in the corner. The old Corolla rattled faintly outside in the lot. The city hummed beyond my windows. But inside I felt only emptiness. The people who had shaped my life, the ones I had sacrificed for, defended, supported, had all failed me when I asked for help. All except one name left on the list. Aunt Grace. The only person I hadn't called yet. The only one I still trusted, even though trust felt like a luxury now. I whispered into the stillness, half prayer, half plea. Please, don't let her disappoint me too. My phone buzzed the next afternoon while I was staring blankly at my journal, pages filled with disappointment. When I saw the name on the screen, my breath caught. Aunt Grace. I hadn't called her yet. She was supposed to be last on the list. But here she was, reaching out first. Olivia, honey. Her warm, familiar voice poured through the line. I just heard from your mother about your job. Are you okay? I blinked, stunned into silence for a moment. Of course Mom had told her. Gossip traveled quickly in this family, but rarely with concern attached. Yet Grace's tone wasn't gossipy. It was worried. Maternal. I'm hanging in there, I managed, my throat tight. Listen, she said gently. Let's meet for lunch tomorrow. My treat. I want to see you, hear everything. Will noon work? I swallowed hard. Yes, noon's perfect. The next day, I drove to a small diner near her apartment on the west side of the city. It wasn't fancy. Red vinyl booths, the smell of frying bacon in the air, a jukebox in the corner that hadn't worked in years. But it felt comfortable. Safe. Grace was already there, waving when she spotted me. She looked exactly as she always did. Silver-streaked hair pulled back in a loose ponytail, simple jeans, a cardigan with mismatched buttons. Her eyes crinkled when she smiled, and when she hugged me, I felt a lump rise in my throat. I'm so sorry about your job, sweetheart, she said, holding me by the shoulders as though to steady me. That company never deserved you anyway. We slid into a booth, and she ordered grilled cheese and tomato soup, her usual comfort meal. I got a turkey sandwich I wasn't hungry for. As we ate, she asked thoughtful questions. Not intrusive, just gentle, trying to understand how I was doing. She offered to call a friend who worked in accounting to help me find leads. She listened without judgment when I explained the sudden collapse of my firm. Her eyes never left mine, and for the first time since this experiment began, I felt seen. When our plates were cleared, Grace reached into her purse. "I know this isn't much," she said, sliding an envelope across the table. "But I want you to take it. It's $3,000. It should help with rent at least." I froze. My hand hovered above the envelope. "Grace, I can't. This is too much." "Nonsense." She pushed it closer. "Family helps family. That's how it's supposed to work." My vision blurred. I blinked, tears spilling despite myself. You don't have to." Her hand closed over mine, steady and warm. "I want to. And if you need a place to stay, my sofa pulls out into a bed. It's not much, but you'd be welcome as long as you need." That broke me. I covered my face with my hands, shoulders shaking. For days I had been hardened, bracing myself against rejection after rejection. Now, faced with this unexpected generosity, the wall inside me cracked. "Thank you," I whispered, voice trembling. "Thank you." She squeezed my hand. "Don't you worry about paying it back right away. Focus on finding a job you actually like this time. Life's too short to work somewhere that doesn't appreciate you." Her words sank deep, reaching places no lecture or excuse from the others had touched. Later, as I drove home, the envelope sat heavy in my purse. Not because of the money itself, but because I knew what it represented. Grace lived paycheck to paycheck on a teacher's salary. She drove an ancient Honda that rattled with every turn. She had once confessed she skipped dinners sometimes so she could afford her medication for diabetes. And still, when she thought I needed help, she gave me nearly everything she had. I couldn't stop crying as I parked outside my apartment. That night I opened my journal. Grace, reaction, called me first, before I reached out, offered immediate emotional support, brought up job connections, slid envelope of $3,000 across the table, offered me her home, no conditions, said family helps family. I underlined that phrase 3 times. Looking at the page, I felt something shift inside me. For the first time since I had hatched this plan, I saw not just failure, but clarity. The test had worked. My family had revealed themselves. Every selfish instinct, every excuse, every layer of indifference. And then there was Grace. She, who had the least to give, gave the most. She, who had no reason to shoulder my burdens, stepped forward without hesitation. The contrast was stark, painful, illuminating. I set the journal aside and stared out the window at the Chicago night. The city lights flickered like distant stars, indifferent to my revelations. But inside me, a flame burned steady. For the first time since the winning numbers had changed everything, I knew one truth. Money didn't corrupt character. It revealed it. And Aunt Grace had shown me the rarest kind of love. I whispered into the dark, a vow forming in my chest. She'll never want for anything again. Not while I'm alive. The envelope of money sat on my kitchen table all night, daring me to open it. I didn't. I couldn't. The weight of it pressed heavier than the millions sitting safely in my trust. Because I knew what it represented. Aunt Grace had given me almost everything she had, while the rest of the family, flush with cars, lake houses, and designer handbags, had given me nothing. By dawn, my decision was clear. She deserved the truth. The following evening, I called her. "Grace, could you come over for dinner? Nothing fancy, just pasta. I want to talk to you." Her laugh carried warmth through the phone. "Of course, sweetheart. I'll bring dessert." When she arrived, she looked tired but radiant in her way, carrying a plastic container of brownies, still warm, wrapped in foil. I served pasta with jarred sauce, pouring tea instead of wine because my hands were already shaking enough. We ate at my small kitchen table, knees almost touching in the cramped space. She chatted about her students, a boy who had finally mastered long division, a girl who doodled flowers in the margins of every test. Her voice was gentle, steady, grounding me as the storm inside me built. Finally, when the plates were cleared, I set her teacup down in front of her and folded my hands tightly. Grace, I began, my throat dry. There's something I need to tell you. And before I do, I need you to know. I wasn't honest with you yesterday. She tilted her head, concern flickering but no judgment in her eyes. What is it, honey? I took a deep breath. I didn't lose my job. My company didn't collapse. I made it up. For the first time, she didn't respond right away. She just waited, her silence patient, urging me to continue. The truth is, my hands trembled. I forced the words out. 3 weeks ago, I won the lottery. $47 million. After taxes, about 28. I haven't told anyone. Not Mom, not Dad, not Rachel or Ethan, not even Sophie. You're the first to know. Her eyes widened slightly, but she didn't gasp or recoil. She simply blinked, taking it in, then set her hands flat on the table. Go on. I didn't tell anyone because I was afraid, I admitted, words tumbling out now. I read all these stories about families falling apart, about winners ruined by greed, and I thought if my family knew, they'd see me as a wallet, not a person. So I decided to test them. I pretended I'd lost everything and needed help. I asked for $5,000. I wanted to see who would be there for me when I had nothing. Tears pricked at my eyes. And Grace, you gave me $3,000 when you barely had enough for yourself. Everyone else turned me away. But you... My voice broke. You gave me almost everything you had. For a long moment, the only sound was the radiator rattling in the corner. Grace sipped her tea, her expression thoughtful, then finally spoke. I see. Are you angry? I whispered, terrified of her answer. She shook her head slowly. Not angry. Sad, maybe. Sad that you felt you had to test us like that. Sad that your heart has been wounded so deeply by your family that you couldn't trust love without proof. Her words pierced me. I looked down at my hands, ashamed. I had to know. And you're the only one who... She reached across the table, her hand warm over mine. Listen to me, Olivia. People show you who they are when giving becomes inconvenient. That's not something you needed to manufacture. It's something you already knew in your heart. Her eyes softened. But I understand why you did it. And I don't blame you. Your family has taken from you without giving back for years. You wanted certainty. You wanted truth. Well, now you have it. I wiped at my eyes. You don't hate me? She smiled faintly, shaking her head. No, honey. I don't hate you. But I do want you to remember something. Money doesn't only reveal who others are. It reveals who we are. How we choose to use it. How we treat people when we don't need anything from them. That's the real test. Her words settled deep into me, resonant and undeniable. I nodded, tears slipping down my cheeks. I want to use it for good. For you? For people like you who've been overlooked, who give everything even when they have nothing. Her expression softened further. I don't need anything from you, Olivia. My apartment may be small, but it's filled with things I love. My car still runs most days. My life is enough. Just knowing you're secure and happy, that's more than enough for me. Her humility made me ache. But you deserve more, Grace. You deserve ease, comfort, dignity. I can give you that. She squeezed my hand, eyes shining. And if you choose to, I'll accept it. But not because I need it. Because it will make you happy to give. We sat in silence after that, the air heavy, but not tense. For the first time in weeks, I felt lighter. The truth was out. The secret shared. And Grace hadn't recoiled. She hadn't demanded. She had simply stayed, steady as always. That night, after she left, I opened my journal and wrote in bold letters across the page. Grace knows, Grace stayed, Grace's family. Then I underlined it until the ink bled through. It started with a text from my mother. Heard you asked Rachel for money too. You should have told me before going around like that. Feels like you're playing us against each other. I stared at the screen, the words burning. My stomach twisted. She wasn't concerned about me. She was concerned about appearances. About the fact that I had dared to make my shame visible to more than one person. Then another message buzzed in. This one from Dad. Stephanie tells me you've been calling everyone for handouts. This is exactly the kind of irresponsible behavior I warned you about. Handouts. The word made my blood run cold. One by one, the judgments trickled in. Rachel sent a carefully worded text. I'm sorry, Liv, but it's not fair to put me in this position. We all have our own responsibilities. Ethan, of course, stayed silent, though I knew he'd already twisted the story into some excuse for why he hadn't helped. Aunt Victoria's voicemail was a masterpiece of passive-aggressive superiority. Well, Olivia, I always said you lacked stability. Now it seems the whole family sees it too. Within 48 hours, the narrative had shifted. I wasn't a daughter in trouble, a sister in need, a niece reaching out. I was suddenly the problem. The unstable one. The beggar. The cautionary tale whispered about over cocktails and holiday dinners. I sat on my bed, journal open but blank, unable to even write the words. My chest felt hollow, my hands numb. I had wanted truth, but I hadn't expected it to echo back at me as accusation. When my phone rang again, I almost didn't answer, but the name on the screen steadied me. Grace. Sweetheart, she said softly when I picked up. How are you holding up? The dam broke. They're all talking about me, I choked out. They think I'm desperate, manipulative, like I've been trying to pit them against each other. Grace was quiet for a moment, letting me spill. They've turned me into the villain, I whispered. And the worst part is, I let them. I asked. I opened the door. Olivia, she said gently, her voice like warm light through a cracked window. You didn't make them show you who they are. They chose to. You gave them an opportunity. What they did with it is on them, not you. I pressed my forehead against my knees, tears soaking into my jeans. But it hurts so much. Even though I knew they wouldn't come through, it still feels like I'm the one who's failed. Her sigh was soft, sorrowful. I know. Family rejection always cuts the deepest, even when it's predictable. But maybe this is the clarity you needed. You asked for honesty, and they gave it, just not in the form you hoped. I swallowed, her words sinking in. So what do I do now? How do I face them again, knowing this is what they think of me? You stand tall, Grace said firmly. You stop begging for scraps of affection from people who've proven they can't give it. And you remember that family is not always the people who share your blood. It's the people who show up, the people who stand by you, no matter what. Her words wrapped around me like a blanket. For the first time since the gossip began, my lungs loosened. Grace, I whispered, I don't know what I'd do without you. You don't have to find out, she said simply. The next weekend, the family gathered at Aunt Victoria's house for a birthday celebration. I hadn't planned to go, but something in me hardened. If they were going to turn me into the villain of their whispered stories, then they could at least do it to my face. When I walked into Victoria's ornate dining room, conversations faltered. Eyes turned, sharp with curiosity and judgment. Rachel avoided my gaze, pretending to adjust the collar of her child's shirt. Dad crossed his arms, lips pressed thin. Mom gave me a strange smile that didn't reach her eyes. I felt the weight of their stares, but I also felt Grace's hand slip into mine, steady and warm. She had come with me, insisting I shouldn't face this alone. Dinner was stiff, brittle with unspoken tension. Finally, Victoria broke the silence, swirling her wine. So, Olivia, heard you've been having quite the financial adventure. Making the rounds, asking for support. A ripple of uncomfortable chuckles moved around the table. I felt heat rise to my face. But before I could speak, Grace set her glass down with a firm clink. Enough, she said sharply. Her voice, usually gentle, carried steel now. Olivia doesn't owe any of you explanations. She reached out in a moment of need. That's what family is supposed to be for. If you chose to turn away, that's your choice. But you don't get to twist it into her failure. The room fell silent. Victoria's smirk faded. Rachel looked down at her plate, and Dad cleared his throat uncomfortably. I squeezed Grace's hand under the table, gratitude swelling in my chest. In that moment, I realized something profound. The family's gossip had stripped away the last illusions I'd been clinging to. They had revealed themselves fully, cold, self-interested, incapable of compassion. And Grace had revealed herself too. Steady, brave, loyal, beyond measure. The truth hurt, but it also set me free. That night, back in my apartment, I opened my journal and wrote, Fallout, reaction. Mother, defensive, shifting blame. Father, accusatory, irresponsible. Rachel, silence, excuses. Victoria, public shaming. Ethan, Lucas, disappeared. Grace defended me openly, stayed. I closed the journal and pressed my hand against the cover, feeling its weight. This experiment had begun as a way to protect myself from greed. Instead, it had given me something I hadn't expected. Clarity. I no longer needed to wonder who deserved a place in my life. They had all answered the question for me. I'd spent most of my life trying to avoid conflict with my family. Keep the peace, bite my tongue, shoulder the burden. That had been my default setting. But the past weeks had stripped me down to the truth. There was no peace to keep. There was only a performance, and I'd been the understudy in a play that demanded my silence. So I did something no one expected. I called everyone. I have an announcement, I told them. Come to my apartment Sunday at 3. It's important. There were questions, suspicion, but in the end, curiosity won. By Sunday afternoon, every seat in my cramped living room was taken. Mom and Howard sat side by side on the love seat, his arms crossed, her smile tight. Dad stood near the window, hands clasped behind his back like he was preparing for a lecture. Elaine perched on the edge of a chair, radiating disapproval. Rachel and Daniel arrived late, Rachel clutching her latte as if caffeine could shield her from discomfort. Ethan slouched in, phone in hand, avoiding my eyes. Aunt Victoria swept in dramatically, Lucas trailing behind her like a shadow, and Grace, bless her, sat near me, her presence a quiet anchor. I looked around the room, heart pounding but strangely steady. For once, I wasn't afraid of their judgment. Thank you for coming, I began. I know there's been a lot of talk lately. Rumors about my finances, about me asking for help. A murmur rippled through the group. Dad raised an eyebrow. Mom shifted uncomfortably. I want to clear the air, I said firmly. Yes, I reached out to each of you. Yes, I asked for $5,000. And yes, it was hard for me to do. But I did it because I thought that's what family was for, showing up for each other in hard times. Ethan snorted softly. You made it sound like an emergency. I turned on him, my voice sharper than I intended. It was an emergency. Or at least, that's how it felt. But you didn't even bother to call me back. His face reddened and he looked away. I shifted my gaze to Dad. And you, Dad, you didn't offer help. You offered a lecture. You told me hitting rock bottom would be a learning experience. Do you know how cruel that sounded when I was sitting across from you terrified? He opened his mouth, but I held up a hand. No, not this time. You don't get to drown me in your lectures when what I needed was compassion. Mom jumped in, her voice defensive. Olivia, you have to understand. Howard and I just bought the lake house. We weren't in a position. I cut her off too. My voice trembling but strong. You weren't in a position? You were in the best position of all. And yet you passed me off like I was someone else's problem. Her mouth snapped shut, her cheeks flushing. Rachel tried next, her voice syrupy. Liv, we wanted to help, but you know how expensive kids' tuition is and… Stop. My tone was icy now. You live in a house twice the size of mine. You just bought a brand new car. And still, you couldn't find a way to help your sister when she was begging? You offered me a guest room, as if moving into your storage closet was the solution. Her eyes dropped, shame flickering across her face. Then Victoria cleared her throat dramatically. Well, Olivia, perhaps if you'd made more responsible career choices, you wouldn't have been in this… Enough! My voice cracked through the room like glass shattering. For a moment, the silence was total. Stunned. I stood, finally towering over them, my pulse racing. For years, I've bent over backwards for this family. I've emptied my savings to cover Ethan's mistakes. I've gone into debt to pay for Rachel's wedding. I've loaned Dad money only to watch him vacation with Elaine. And what did I get in return? Excuses. Silence. Judgment. Not one of you, not one, showed up for me when I asked for help. Except Grace. I looked at her, sitting quietly with her hands folded, eyes glistening with quiet strength. She gave me $3,000 out of her teacher's salary, while she was struggling with her health. She had the least to give, and she gave the most. That's what family is supposed to look like. Grace lowered her gaze, embarrassed, but I saw the tears welling. I turned back to the rest. I'm done begging for scraps of your affection. I'm done pretending we're closer than we are. From now on, I will not be the emergency fund you run to. I will not be the punching bag for your criticisms. And I will not measure my worth by how useful I am to you." The silence was thick, electric. No one moved. No one spoke. Finally, Dad cleared his throat. "Olivia, this outburst isn't productive. We're only trying to—" "No, Dad," I interrupted. "You're trying to control the story. But this is my story now, and I'm the one writing it." With that, I walked to the door and opened it wide. "You can leave now, all of you." One by one they filed out. Some muttered excuses, others stayed silent. Rachel avoided my eyes. Ethan pocketed his phone without a word. Victoria looked scandalized but said nothing. When the last of them left, the apartment was quiet again. Only Grace remained, sitting calmly on the couch. "You did well," she said softly. "That couldn't have been easy." I sank beside her, trembling with adrenaline. "It wasn't. But for the first time, I feel free," she smiled, patting my hand. "That's because you finally told the truth. And truth has a way of setting us free, even when it hurts." I leaned back, exhaling shakily. For once, I wasn't afraid of disappointing them, because I finally realized their opinion of me had never been based on who I really was. And for the first time, that realization didn't break me. It built me. The Monday after the family meeting, I walked into the office of Whitman and Gray Marketing with a resignation letter tucked neatly inside my purse. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, the copy machine whirred in the corner, and the familiar hum of overworked employees filled the space. Arnold, my boss, breezed past my desk with his usual fake cheer, dropping a stack of client reports onto my already full workload. "Need these polished by 3, he said, not even glancing at me. Normally, I would have swallowed the frustration, rolled up my sleeves, and gotten it done. But not today. Today I was done playing the quiet, overlooked accountant. I stood, smoothed my skirt, and walked straight into his office. He looked up, surprised. "Olivia, something wrong?" I set the envelope on his desk. "I'm resigning, effective immediately." His mouth opened, then closed, as if the words didn't compute. "You, what? Why?" I smiled. A calm I'd never felt before settling over me. "Because I'm worth more than being invisible. And because my life is about to take a different path." Before he could sputter another word, I turned and left. As the elevator doors slid shut, a rush of adrenaline surged through me. For the first time in years, I wasn't weighed down by fear of bills, deadlines, or disappointing someone. I was free to choose. That week, I met with Thomas Bennett in his sleek downtown office again. This time, the folder he slid across the desk wasn't just numbers and investments. It was plans. "I want to start a nonprofit," I told him. "Something real. Something that matters." He leaned back, steepling his fingers. "Tell me." I thought of Grace. Her envelope of money, her mismatched cardigan, the weariness in her eyes when she talked about tutoring late at night just to cover medical costs. "There are so many people like her," I said. "Elderly, living alone, forgotten by their families, struggling with bills, health, loneliness. I want to build something for them. A foundation that provides financial help, companionship, maybe even small home repairs. A safety net for people who gave everything and got nothing back." Thomas nodded slowly, respect softening his features. "That's a noble mission. And with your resources, it's entirely possible." By the end of the meeting, Carter Foundation for Senior Support was no longer just an idea. It was becoming reality. The months that followed were a blur of paperwork, meetings, and plans. I hired a small but passionate team. A retired social worker, a young project manager eager to make a difference, and Sophie, my best friend, who joined as outreach coordinator. Her background as a nurse gave her insight into the needs we were trying to address. We rented a modest office space in a converted warehouse on the west side. It wasn't glamorous, peeling paint, drafty windows, but it was alive with purpose. Flyers went up around the city, hotlines were opened, volunteers trained. Our first case was Mrs. Hernandez, an 82-year-old widow whose roof leaked every time it rained. The day volunteers arrived to fix it, she cried into my shoulder, whispering, "I thought no one remembered me anymore." Next was Mr. Thomas, a retired bus driver struggling with insulin costs. We arranged monthly stipends through the foundation. When I handed him the first check, his hands shook, and he said, "I can breathe again." Each story carved something new in me. With every life touched, I felt the weight of my past disappointments lessen. Grace became my silent partner in all of it. She came to the office often, bringing cookies for the staff, sitting with the seniors who visited, reading to them in the waiting room. She never once asked about the money or the scale of the operation. She only smiled and said, "You're doing good, Olivia. That's all that matters." One afternoon, as we sat in her small new house, a cozy craftsman I had quietly purchased for her through the trust, she looked at me with tears in her eyes. "You know," she said, "I never expected anything from you. But seeing you build this, seeing you turn pain into purpose, that's more than I ever dreamed." I squeezed her hand. "You gave me the blueprint, Grace. You showed me what real family looks like. I just followed your example." The rest of the family noticed, of course. They saw the news articles about the foundation, the photos of me at ribbon cuttings, the interviews where I spoke about supporting elders in need. At Thanksgiving, Rachel made a half-hearted attempt to congratulate me. "It's amazing what you've built, Liv. I mean, who knew nonprofit work could be sustainable?" Her tone was laced with curiosity, suspicion. Dad, for once, had no lecture. Just a clipped, "Seems you found your niche." Victoria sniffed, muttering something about publicity stunts, but I didn't care anymore. Their words had lost power over me, because for the first time in my life, I wasn't defined by what they thought. I was defined by what I was building, by the faces of seniors who smiled again because someone remembered them, by the laughter in the office as Sophie and I stayed late brainstorming, by the steady presence of Grace, reminding me that love didn't measure itself in dollars, but in constancy. One year after walking into Thomas Bennett's office with trembling hands, I stood in front of a crowd at the grand opening of our second community center. A banner fluttered overhead. Carter Foundation. Family Beyond Blood. As I looked out at the faces, seniors, volunteers, donors, friends, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. The money had changed my life, yes, but it hadn't saved me. What saved me was the choice of what to do with it. And for the first time, I was exactly where I was meant to be. A year can change everything. 12 months ago, I was sitting in this same apartment, staring at a slip of paper with 6 numbers printed across it, my hands shaking so hard I almost dropped it. I had no idea then that those numbers would dismantle my illusions, strip bare my relationships, and rebuild me into someone I barely recognize now. Today I sit in the sunlit office of the Carter Foundation, watching volunteers sort boxes of donated groceries and repair kits for seniors. Outside the window, the new community van, painted with our name and logo, waits to deliver supplies. Sophie is in the next room, training a fresh group of volunteers with her usual mix of kindness and discipline. The air hums with purpose, with life, and my heart hums with peace. My family, in the traditional sense, has grown distant. Mom still calls on birthdays and holidays, her tone carefully warm but threaded with defensiveness. She never mentioned the 5,000 again, but sometimes I catch the hesitation in her voice, the weight of guilt she can't quite name. Dad sends occasional emails filled with articles about financial planning, as if I'm still his student. I read them, smile faintly, and hit delete. Rachel posts photos of her perfect children online, sometimes tagging me in cheerful captions that feel more like PR than love. Ethan drifts in and out, still chasing schemes, still making promises that evaporate. Victoria and Lucas? They remain exactly the same. Critical, entitled, irrelevant. But none of it cuts me anymore. The sting is gone. Their absence doesn't feel like abandonment. It feels like clarity, like a wound that's healed into a scar. Visible, but no longer tender. Grace, on the other hand, is flourishing. She lives 3 blocks from me now, in a craftsman house with wide doorways and a garden she tends daily. I made sure it was bought quietly, through the trust, so it never looked like a gift, only like life finally giving her what she deserved. She has proper medical care, her diabetes under control, and she volunteers 3 days a week at a literacy program for children. Every Thursday night, she comes over for dinner. We eat on my patio under string lights, sipping tea and talking about everything and nothing. Sometimes she teases me about how serious I've become. Sometimes I catch her watching me with quiet pride. "Do you realize," she said once, as we shared apple pie, How different everything could have been if you'd told the family right away about the money. I nodded, thinking of the alternate universe where the phone calls never stopped, where love became currency, where I could never be sure who was genuine. They would have been here every day, I said, but for all the wrong reasons. Grace smiled knowingly. And you would never have learned what you know now. She's right. The experiment, painful as it was, gave me the freedom of truth. It showed me who belonged in my life and who didn't. It taught me that loyalty isn't loud. It's quiet. It doesn't announce itself in speeches or promises. It shows up in envelopes of $3,000 scraped from a teacher's savings, in a warm sofa offered without hesitation, in a steady voice that says, "I'm here." It also taught me about myself. For years I measured my worth by what I could give away, by how much I sacrificed, how much I bent, how much I endured. Winning the lottery didn't change me. It revealed me. It forced me to choose what kind of person I wanted to be. And I chose this. A life where I no longer chase approval from those incapable of giving it. A life where wealth isn't a secret shame or a public performance, but a tool. A way to build, to mend, to honor people like Grace who give without expecting anything back. The Carter Foundation has grown faster than I ever dreamed. We've helped more than 200 seniors in the city this year alone, repairing homes, covering medication costs, providing companionship. The stories pile up in my mind like jewels. Mrs. Hernandez standing beneath her new roof without fear of leaks. Mr. Thomas laughing as he finally got his prescriptions without debt. Volunteers painting a widow's living room while she told stories of her youth. Each face, each voice has stitched itself into me. This is my family now. One evening, as the sun set over the city, Grace and I sat on her porch, watching the sky bleed pink and gold. She reached over, patted my hand and said, "You did good, kiddo. Not just with the money, but with the choices. You turned it into something that matters." I smiled through the lump in my throat. I had a good teacher. The truth is, the lottery didn't give me happiness. It gave me the chance to see clearly, to choose wisely, to rebuild my life not on obligation, but on meaning. Full circle. I began this year whispering no way into an empty apartment, terrified that money would ruin me. I end it whispering thank you into the night sky, grateful that money gave me freedom. The freedom to walk away, to build anew, to love the people who love me back. The most valuable thing I gained wasn't millions in the bank. It was peace.